Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So today we are doing Mishnah 17, 7 rather, sorry, Mishnah 7. And this is from Rabbi Chalafta ben Chananya, Rabbi Chalafta ben Dosa from Kfar Chananya. So a not so much quoted person in the Talmud, but Rabbi Chalafta ben Dosa ish Kfar Chananya Omer. He said as follows. Asara sheyoshvin va'oskin baTorah. It's actually kind of a long Mishnah, but it's all on the same theme. So we're going to read the whole thing and we'll probably end up splitting it. 10 people sitting together and engaged in Torah. Shechina sharuya b'neihem, God's presence rests between them. Shenemar, and he quotes a verse, Elokim nitzav ba'adas kel, that Hashem stands in the congregation of God, or the assembly of God. Uminayi, so that's 10. Uminayin afilu chamisha. How do you know that even 5 people are engaged in Torah, that God's presence is there? Shenema, there's another verse, it says, Va'agudaso al eretz yisada. And he has established yisada, he's founded his bundle on the earth. Okay, we'll have to get back to those. And Minayin, how do we know afilu shlosha? Even 3 people are sitting and engaged in study. Shenemar, it says, Bekerev Elohim yishpot. In the midst of judges, he is judging. Uminayin is a verse from Tehillim. Uminayin, how do we know afilu shnayim, even if there are only 2 people engaged in study, that God's presence is there? Shenemar, az nidberu yirei Hashem, then spoke those who fear God, ishel rayehu, one person to another, vayakshev Hashem vayishman, God paid attention and he heard and he listened. This verse we actually had quoted earlier in a previous Mishnah, also dealing with 2 people sitting together and having words of Torah between them. And finally, how do you know even one person who is sitting and engaged in study, God's presence is there? Shenemar, b'chol hamakom asher azkir es shemi, avo elecha b'rachticha, in any place that I will remember my name, my name will be mentioned, then I will come and bless you. So even one person, this is in singular form. Okay, so we've got this idea that God's presence is amongst those who are studying Torah, and we have different numbers of people, and we start off if there's 10, then 5, 3, 2, 1. Seemingly, you could have just solved the problem and started with 1. So on a basic level, what it's teaching you is that, yes, it's true that God's presence is there even with 1 person, but there's a different level. Like there's different levels. The more people, the more, in a sense, you feel God's presence, or the more, we'll call it hashpa'ah, which is, God's flow, God's having effect on you, so to speak, is more. And so there is a difference in the numbers, but God's presence does come in and is there even with 1 person. It's just a general idea. There are 2 different, there's a few different versions in terms of how to approach this Mishnah in general. The way we read it was engaging in Torah study. There's another version that talks about people sitting in judgment, that it's talking about judges who are judging cases or judging situations. So there could be one about Torah study, another idea of reading the whole thing, referring to judges sitting in judgment. We'll get back to that. And there's going to be one other section, which there's going to be a flip on whether it's which verse applies to which thing. So we'll start with the 10. Because it starts with 10 to tell us God's presence rests among 10. I'm going to leave the words up because we kind of need them. The verse that was quoted is Elokim nitzav ba'adas kel, that God stands in the assembly or the congregation of God. An edah is a congregation or an assembly. Generally, for us, that's the concept of a minyan. And he's talking about 10. Where do we know that 10 is an assembly? So we just read a few weeks ago the story of the spies. And in Parsha Shalach, in the story of the spies, God talks about this edah hara'ah hazos, this evil congregation, this evil assembly. Remember, there were 12 spies, but only 10 of them were wicked. 2 of them were Sadiqim, righteous. That was Kalev and Yehoshua. So they're not included in the 12. They're the 10. and God referred to them as an assembly, as an Eidah. So we see 10 is referred to as an assembly, and that's how we get the idea of 10 for a minyan, etc. That's the basic source over here. Now we come to 5. How do we know 5? So it says aguda. So it's aguda, and aguda is a bundle. Now, how do we know that a bundle is 5? Where did that come from? So there we have a few different sources of trying to understand it. One is the idea that there's some place where it talks about holding something in your hand, that a bundle is something you can hold in your hand, and has 5 fingers. You hold it with your 5 fingers. That's one idea about the 5. Also, actually, when you make a fist, your hand becomes like a bundle. Your fingers become like a bundle. You can have an eged of 5. Another idea of the 5 is that you can have, actually from here, the idea of 5 could be where you'd have 3 judges and 2 litigants. So there's another version where they switch it around, and the 5 is learned from this verse, B'kerev Elohim Yishpot, actually in the midst of judges. The word over here, Elohim, is not referring to God, it's referring to judges. And they're talking about judges, so judges is a minimum of 3, but in a court case, you also have litigants. So if you have 2 litigants, you have 5. So that's another source of how you get 5. So you see like very different ways of approaching how to interpret these verses. Sorry. The number 3, as we mentioned, comes from God standing with the judges in judgment. So if you just take it on face value that a court, we know a bet din needs 3. So there you have 3 right there. According to the other system, which they flipped it around, so it's this bundle on the earth that's referring to 3. And where do we see bundles of 3? So bundles of 3, we have a few different ideas for. One is when talked about actually by Pesach, when the Jews were in Egypt, they had to take a bundle of hyssop and dip it in the blood and put it on the doorpost. So there, the bundle of hyssop had to be 3 different stalks. So we had 3 over there. We also have an idea of, interestingly, that talked about the verse talks about Eretz Yisada, the earth, foundations of earth. And one of the commentaries points out that what are the foundations of earth? There are 3: fire, air, and water. Those are foundations of the earth, and therefore those are surrounding, or the foundation of the earth. That's again another number 3. And as you mentioned, 3 judges. There's just a general understanding here of what's God's presence is resting here. So does it mean that God's presence is resting? So the Tiferes Yisrael points that when God's presence, when people are learning, so that God comes along there and he's helping them, he's going to help people to feel the influence of God and to enlighten their eyes and wisdom. He says that it's not so easy when we're learning Torah. You have to interpret all these things. How do we understand it? And many times, especially when you're learning the Talmud, it's like you're trying to get to the depth of it, not using Art Scroll, trying to figure it out for yourself, right? And in such situation, you really do need a little godly help. He puts thoughts into your mind, and we sometimes we call it the idea of siyata deshmaya, help from heaven, right? And I actually talk about that whenever it comes time to say Dvar Torah, right? God puts things into your mind at the last minute, right? How it all of a sudden pops into your mind, it's going to just pop into your mind. Hashem is putting it there. You work at it, and Hashem helps you by influencing you. And in that idea, again, going back to the numbers, so the larger the number, the greater the influence that God is going to exert to allow you to understand more. One more thing, and we'll just hold it there for today, is that even with the number 5, there are times when a court will require 5 judges. Even though normally a basic court is 3, there's a couple of situations where we deemed five. One, again, these are not things that are happening for us in our days, but when they had the Egla Arufa, when they have found a body in between two cities, you didn't know where it came from. There was a certain ritual with a heifer called Egla Arufa. You needed five judges to judge that situation, as well as to give smicha. They had five judges as well, and we'll have to hold it here for today. We'll have to see about tomorrow what the story is. I'll let you know. Have a great day, everyone.